From the French market to 9 Mile Point, Sicilian and Italian families stretched pay with barrels, bread, and Gulf bounty. Red gravy bubbled beside shrimp, olive salad met sesame loaves, and feast day altars fed whole blocks. Tonight, 25 dinners from New Orleans' Little Palermo, affordable, authentic, and remembered. 1. Macaroni with red gravy, Sunday sauce. Tomato gravy simmered until sweet and deep, ladled over macaroni, sometimes with a meaty bone or a single meatball to perfume the pot. Onions and garlic hit warm oil first, then tomatoes cooked low while errands and visits filled the afternoon. Imported or canned tomatoes and dry pasta stayed affordable and easy to store, and butcher bones added richness without adding cost. It made sense for big families and small kitchens. One pot, many plates, and no fuss. Neighbors could tell who was cooking by the aroma drifting out to the stoop, a weekly promise that supper would be slow, red, and generous. Pasta con sarde, sardines fennel, Sicilian style. A Gulfside echo of Palermo, pasta glossed with sardines, wild fennel or anise notes, and a sandy snowfall of toasted crumbs. The fish melted into oil with onion before raisins and nuts, when luck allowed, rounded the sauce. Tinned sardines traveled cheaply. Fennel volunteered in vacant lots and back gardens, so flavor didn't depend on money. It was thrifty and bold at once, stretching a single can into a family meal. Every bite tasted like a letter from home, proof that memory and skill could turn pantry odds into something celebratory. 3. Muffuletta, early market sandwich. A round sesame loaf split and stacked with olive salad, cured meats, and firm cheese, then pressed so the juices mingled. The trick was patience. Let the bread drink in the brine until every layer spoke the same language. Italian bakeries supplied the loaves. Groceries near the wharves stocked olives, peppers, and cold cuts, making a portable feast that didn't need a stove. It made sense for dock workers and market hands who needed calories that could travel and keep. What started as a practical lunch became an emblem, a handheld map of Little Palermo itself. 4. Pane e panelle, chickpea fritter sandwich. Panelle, thin chickpea slabs sliced and fried, went straight into bread, sometimes crowned with a spoon of olive salad. A pot, a whisk, and time turned inexpensive chickpea flour into a firm sheet that cut cleanly and crisped fast. Chickpea flour kept beautifully, cost little, and brought plant protein to meat-light weeks. For families watching every coin, this was dinner that crackled, perfumed the room, and filled bellies without apology. Street food roots met home kitchen thrift, a sandwich that tasted brighter than its price tag. 5. Pasta e fagioli, macaroni beans. White beans simmered with onion and bay until tender, then finished with a handful of small pasta to make a stew that ate like both soup and supper. A drizzle of saved oil, or the end of a rind, when available, nudged the pot from simple to special. Dry beans and boxed pasta were the backbone of corner stores, stretching paychecks and feeding visitors without ceremony. It made sense because it respected time more than money, long simmering instead of costly ingredients. Ladled into deep bowls, it was weeknight security, a steady, steaming promise that everyone would go to bed satisfied. 6. Shrimp and red gravy over spaghetti gulf. Shrimp simmered in a tomato gravy and poured over long pasta turned a simple Friday into something that tasted like a festival. Onions and garlic softened in oil, tomatoes went into burble low, and the shrimp slipped in at the end so they stayed tender and sweet. It made sense because shrimp were plentiful and affordable in season. A small sack could stretch across a whole family when paired with pasta from the corner grocer. The shells didn't go to waste. Cooks saved them for a future pot, deepening tomorrow's gravy with today's scraps. Meatless tradition met neighborhood thrift, and the kitchen smelled like the docks and the market at once. Plates came to the table red and glossy, noodles catching every bit of sauce, proving that patience and a good boil could turn everyday ingredients into celebration. 7. Oyster spaghetti. Spaghetti tossed with gently warmed oysters, and their liquor brought the sea straight to the table without fuss. Oysters met butter or oil, and a little garlic just long enough to bloom their flavor. Then parsley and black pepper finished the pan before everything slid over hot pasta. It worked because local beds kept oysters accessible. In the right season, a sack was cheap, and a careful cook could feed many with a modest haul. The method honored the ingredient. No heavy mask, only warmth and salt and the ocean's own broth. Families saved it for holidays or company, but it was still a budget win compared with pricier meats. A few wedges of bread to chase the last sheen from the plate, and what started as a fisherman's good fortune became a dining room treat. 8. Stuffed artichokes, breadcrumb garlic. Artichokes packed tight with garlicky breadcrumbs steamed into a tender, fragrant centerpiece that turned a handful of pantry goods into ceremony. Stale bread became crumbs, stirred with garlic, herbs, and a little oil. When the cheese box wasn't empty, a spoonful sharpened the mix. Leaves were eased apart and pressed full. Then the artichokes stood upright in a pot to steam until the hearts surrendered. Italian greengrocers stocked artichokes by the crate, and backyard plots nursed spiky plants that loved the climate. So a feast day look didn't require a feast day budget. It made sense for large tables. One artichoke served many hands, leaf by leaf, with quiet conversation between bites. By the time the hearts appeared, the room smelled of olive and steam and garlic, and plates held proof that thrift and care can feel like abundance. 9. Eggplant parmigiana, or eggplant in gravy. Fried slices of eggplant layered with tomato gravy and baked until everything settled into a soft, savory stack, delivered meatless heft with garden pride. The cook salted and drained the slices, browned them in shallow oil, then built the pan. Eggplant, spooned gravy, maybe a scatter of cheese, until it promised a square for everyone. Eggplant thrived in the heat and stayed affordable at the market, and a good gravy needed more time than money. The dish made sense because it turned a few vegetables into a Sunday-feeling tray. Leftovers tasted even better, folded into bread or rewarmed for latecomers. Families who grew their own saved seeds and swapped starts, so the pan carried neighborhood effort as much as flavor. A browned edge, a tender center, and the familiar red shimmer said supper was ready, no butcher required. 10. Caponata with bread caponata, sweet sour eggplant with onions, celery, olives, and capers, served cool with a crusty loaf was the summer answer to appetite and heat. Eggplant browned first, then the pan welcomed a little vinegar and sugar to balance the salt of olives and capers. Everything rested so flavors married instead of shouting. It made sense in New Orleans weather. Caponata kept well, tasted better after a night, and didn't ask a household to fire the oven again. Markets and pantries provided the parts, and cooks could scale it to whatever the garden or paycheck allowed. A bowl on the table with bread beside it turned into supper that invited lingering. A bite, a story, another bite. When the day ran long and the air stayed warm, this dish met the moment with brightness, thrift, and that distinct Sicilian tug between sweet and sharp. 11. Sicilian sausage with peppers. Onions, fennel-scented links braised with peppers and onions brought a feast-night aroma to narrow kitchens. Sausage hit a hot pan first, just long enough to take color and wake up the fennel. Then onions and bell peppers slid in with a small splash of wine or water to loosen the browned bits. The lid went on, the heat dropped, and everything settled into a silky, pepper-sweet pan gravy that begged for bread. It made sense because neighborhood butchers ground house links cheaply, seasoned the way families liked, more garlic here, more fennel there, and sold by the coil for payday or by the piece when money was tight. The dish stretched easily, pile slices on French bread, spoon over macaroni, or tuck into lunchboxes cold. Stairwells and stoops carried the perfume down the block, a signal that someone's table would be lively, plates passed quickly, and seconds encouraged. Simple parts, patient heat, and a bakery loaf turned into a memory that clung to curtains and conversations long after the last pepper was chased from the plate. 12. Braciole, spiedini, stuffed beef rolls. Thin sheets of beef rolled around breadcrumbs, herbs, and sometimes raisins or pine nuts transformed tough cuts into company fare. Cooks laid out the slices, scattered garlicky crumbs and parsley, tucked in the sweet, salty Sicilian surprises when the pantry allowed, then tied each little bundle with cotton string. The rolls browned briefly and sank into red gravy to simmer until the meat relaxed and the crumbs drank up flavor. It worked because frugality drove technique. Budget beef became tender with time. Stale bread became a seasoned stuffing, and the sauce pulled everything together. A single pot produced both the main dish and a richer gravy for macaroni, offering 2 wins from one slow afternoon. On feast days, braciole arrived at the table last, carrying anticipation. Strings snipped, slices fanned out to show the spiral. Each bite offered layers, savory beef, herbal warmth, and now and then, a bright pop of sweetness that reminded families where their grandparents came from and how thrift could still taste like celebration. 13. Minestra di verdura, greens beans soup. A big pot of greens and beans simmered with onion and bay turned market odds and ends into complete nourishment. Escarole, chicory, or whatever leafy bundle looked best at the stand, collards in a pinch, beet greens when lucky, met olive oil, garlic, and a heel of bread or rind from last week's cheese. White beans went in to soften and thicken the broth. A late drizzle of oil and a pinch of pepper flakes finished the bowl. The logic was simple. Greens were inexpensive, beans were steady, and a pot large enough to share could sit at the back of the stove all afternoon. Some cooks slipped in a scrap of sausage or a bone, others kept it meatless for Fridays, but the comfort stayed the same. Ladled into deep bowls with a crust of bread, minestra tasted like virtue without virtue's price tag, clean, savory, and filling. It fed elders gently, carried workers through another shift, and taught younger mouths the flavor of patience. Humble ingredients, handled kindly, made a meal that respected both appetite and budget. 14. Stuffed Mirliton, Mirliton ripieno. Mirliton, chayote by another name, arrived in baskets and backyard vines, then took on Sicilian form as stuffed halves. The squash par-cooked to tender, its pale flesh scooped and folded with onions, the local trinity of celery and bell pepper, breadcrumbs, and a handful of shrimp or sausage if the purse allowed. The mixture went back into the shells, dusted with more crumbs, and baked until the tops turned gold and the kitchen smelled of butter and the river. It made sense in New Orleans. Mirliton was abundant and cheap, and stuffing stretched a few ounces of seafood or meat across an entire pan. The dish bridged traditions. Gulf catch met Sicilian technique, and the result fit both the weather and the calendar. Families carried foil-tented trays to church halls and stoops. Holiday tables made room between macaroni and greens. Leftovers reheated gently for latecomers. Every bite balanced soft squash, savory crumbs, and the sweet snap of shrimp or the spicy bloom of sausage. New world produce, old world wisdom, an easy partnership, baked until it felt like home. 15. Pollo al sugo, tomato braised chicken with macaroni. Chicken pieces simmered in red gravy turned a modest bird into a midweek feast and tomorrow's lunch. The cook browned the chicken just enough to seal in juices, then nestled it into a pot of tomato sauce already humming with onion and garlic. Time did the rest. Meat loosened from bone, sauce deepened with chicken's richness, and a ladle found its way over a waiting bowl of macaroni. It worked because chicken was economical and forgiving, and one pot could handle both the braise and the pasta topping without fuss. A few wings or backs stretched the flavor as surely as thighs, and no one minded if the cheesekin was light that week. The table went quiet for the first bites, then lively as bones piled up, bread wiped plates clean, and someone asked about the next pot. Leftover gravy slipped into eggs at breakfast or met a meatball the following day, proof that a careful simmer buys time as well as taste. In small apartments and busy houses, this was the answer to hunger and noise. Generous, familiar, and always welcome. 16. Olive salad. Provolone on French bread. A split loaf, a jar, and a knife turned a hot evening into dinner. The olive salad, garlicky cubes of green and black olives, celery, peppers, a little pickle and oil, went down first, soaking the crumbs so the bread carried flavor with every bite. Provolone slices followed, sharp and clean. Then the halves pressed together under a cutting board or a cast-iron pan until the edges slicked and the middle married. It made sense because everything came from the corner Italian grocery. Jars on the shelf, paper-wrapped cheese from the case, and French bread still warm on the counter. No stove, no sweat, just a sandwich built to stand up to humidity and hunger. Wrapped in brown paper for the levy, sliced for a quick table, or tucked into lunch the next day, it tasted like the market, briny, bright, and busy. Families called it making do, but the first bite said abundance. 17. Sardines with fennel orange salad. Tinned sardines opened with a tidy hiss, slid onto a plate, and met a heap of shaved fennel and sweet orange. A thread of oil and a crack of black pepper were all it needed. The pairing worked because it was pure Sicily in New Orleans clothes, fennel that sprouted along fence lines, citrus stacked high at the French market, and inexpensive fish that traveled by boat and train without spoiling. On Fridays, or any night when the house ran hot and the budget ran thin, this plate felt clean and lively. Salt, anise perfume, sunshine sweetness. Bread pulled the oil into the meal. A glass of tea cooled the room. It fed elders gently and workers briskly, and it reminded everyone that thrift could sing if the flavors were honest. For some, it was a first lesson in balance. For others, a weekly promise that the sea was never far from the table. 18. Pasta con le sarde amare, breadcrumbs, fennel, no fish. When the fish were still at sea, humor stood in for protein. Cooks toasted breadcrumbs in olive oil until nutty and crisp, perfumed them with fennel fronds or a few seeds, and tossed the crumbs through hot pasta so each strand wore a savory coat. Sometimes golden raisins or a whisper of anchovy paste made an appearance. Often crumbs alone did the lifting. It made sense because flavor comes from time, not price. The toasty crunch mimicked sardines' richness. The fennel gave the right anise echo, and the whole dish cost little more than a pot of water and a handful from the bread box. Families smiled at the name and ate gratefully, calling it the sardines at sea as a joke and a truth. It taught kids to love the honest taste of browned bread and taught grown-ups that a pantry can be generous when technique is kind. The memory stays, simple, sly, and deeply satisfying. 19. Sfincione, Sicilian pan pizza. Saturday brought bakery pans lined with oiled dough, thick and soft, waiting for a tumble of onions slowly sweated sweet. Anchovy melted invisibly into the onions, more seasoning than fish. Oregano dusted the top, and toasted breadcrumbs took the place of a heavy cheese blanket. Baked in deep trays, cut into square slabs, Sfincione fed crowds with a crisp edge and a steamy middle. It worked because bakers could turn flour into dinners by the dozen, and families could buy by the piece. 2 squares for a worker, a whole tray for a choir practice or ball game. Tomatoes came on when the purse allowed. When it didn't, onions and crumbs carried the day. The scent drifted down sidewalks, gathering children and pay envelopes alike. Eaten warm against a paper sleeve or cooled on a plate beside olives, Sfincione proved that good bread, patient onions, and a little fish go a very long way. 20. Fava bean stew with greens, St. Joseph's bowl. In March, gratitude simmered. Dried favas soaked and softened in a pot with onions and a sturdy armful of greens, chicory, escarole, or whatever the stall had, then finished with olive oil until the broth turned silky. Families ladled it into bowls on St. Joseph's Day, set it on altars between lilies and loaves, and shared it freely with neighbors, whether they shared the faith or simply shared the street. The dish made sense because favas were affordable and symbolic, rescuer beans in years of want, and greens were always cheaper than meat. Beyond the feast, the bowl stayed practical, a meatless Friday supper, a Lenten anchor, a weeknight answer that reheated kindly. It tasted of peppery greens and mellow beans, the kind of comfort that makes the shoulders drop and the talk return. More than a recipe, it was a promise kept each spring. We remember, we share, we're thankful. Coming up, the altar pastas, dressed breads, and cool sweets that carried little Palermo through feast days and summer heat. 21. Pasta con modica, breadcrumb pasta St. Joseph's Day. Spaghetti hits the bowl glistening with garlic-scented oil, then a rain of toasted breadcrumbs, poor man's cheese with the best crunch in town. A handful of chopped parsley or fennel frond brightens the plate. A pinch of red pepper gives it a small, happy spark. It shows up every March on St. Joseph's altars because it's meatless, humble, and meant for sharing. But families make it on any thin night when the pantry, not the paycheck, decides dinner. The logic is perfect. Yesterday's bread returns as golden moudica, a topping that carries the flavor of time and heat. This is thrift that tastes like celebration, garlic warming the room, crumbs catching in the pasta's twist. You eat it with gratitude, a heel of bread nearby to gather the last flecks from the plate. One pot, one pan, and a blessing in a bowl. It feeds neighbors after Mass and children at the table with the same gentle generosity. 22. CCE cicoria, chickpeas with bitter greens. A pot of chickpeas simmers until the beans relax and the broth turns silky. In goes a tumble of chicory or escarole, whatever the market has cheap, or whatever's thriving in the backyard strip. The greens wilt to a mellow bite, the chickpeas give nutty comfort, and a last thread of olive oil makes the surface shine. This is fast day supper and any day supper. Pantry legumes meet bargain greens and become more than either. A clove of garlic softened in the pot lends its calm. A squeeze of citrus, if someone brought home a lemon, nudges the flavors awake. It made sense because chickpeas kept on the shelf, greens were affordable, and the pair ate like a full meal with a wedge of bread. You spoon it up and feel both grounded and light, bitter and sweet in balance, the way a city holds work and music at once. It's nourishment without noise, a steady promise in a bowl. 3. Pane cunzato, dressed bread. No stove, no fuss, split a sesame loaf, rub the crumb with olive oil until it drinks, and crown it with sliced tomato, a few anchovy fillets, oregano, and black pepper. Salt brings the juice forward. The loaf becomes a salad you can hold. It's the wharf shift supper that happens on stoops and steps, at kitchen counters and market benches, built entirely from shop ingredients. Tomatoes come from the stall, the oil from a tin behind the grocer, anchovies from a glass jar that seems to last forever, the bread from a baker who knows the mornings rise by feel. The why is simple. Zero fuel, big flavor, and a meal that keeps its dignity in the heat. You press the halves together and the seeds and oil mix into something glossy and generous. Workers tuck wedges into paper, kids trade bites, elders show where to scatter the oregano with a practiced hand. Dressed bread is proof that dinner can be as easy as good things meeting each other. 4. Ricotta with honey fruit. A spoon carves through cool ricotta and settles a cloud onto a plate. A thread of honey runs over the top and finds the ridges. Slices of whatever's in season, figs, peaches, berries, lean against the white like church windows catching light. Nothing more is needed. The dairy comes from the neighborhood shop where curds are still a daily conversation. The honey arrives in jars that smell faintly of wildflowers. The fruit rides home in paper sacks from the market. It makes sense because it's a small luxury that respects a small budget. No oven, no eggs to spare, just freshness with a little sweetness. On humid nights, it eats like forgiveness. After Sunday pasta, it eats like a pause. Children get it first, elders last, and there's always one more spoon for a neighbor who knocks. You taste milk, sunlight, and the easy grace of not overworking a good thing, a gentle finish that keeps the room quiet and happy. 25. Lemon ice, granita al limone with biscotti. A shallow pan of sweetened lemon water turns to ice in the cold, then yields to a fork, shaving into bright crystals that tumble like snow in August. The first spoonful is a small shock. Cold, sour, sweet, chasing the heat from your tongue and the day from your shoulders. A biscotti alongside gives a crunch to measure the melt, something to dip when the crystals soften against the rim. It worked in Little Palermo because ice houses, cafe freezers, and steady citrus imports met a sweltering climate. The only real tool was patience and the scrape-scrape rhythm that turned a block into a breeze. Bowls move from kitchen to porch to sidewalk. Children argue for the lemoniest corner. Elders smile because this is the taste of summers past and feast days present. It's dessert and drink and memory at once, cheap and generous, a street corner treat poured into the home. The last spoon finds zest at the bottom and leaves the room a degree cooler, the talk a little lighter, the night a little longer. The story of Little Palermo is the story of a port city teaching old country habits new tricks. Italian New Orleanians blended pantry scents with Gulf abundance. Dry pasta and beans, olive barrels stacked in corner groceries, fennel sprouting in backyard strips, and shrimp or oysters bought cheap when the catch ran generous. Time did the heavy lifting. Pots kept low, sauces simmered long, and tough cuts softened into Sunday tenderness on a Tuesday. When cheese ran short, toasted breadcrumbs brought crunch and savor. When heat made ovens impossible, dressed bread, marinated salads, and lemon ice moved dinner onto stoops and porches. St. Joseph altars sent meatless bowls beyond the church steps. Neighbors left with paper plates and full hearts. The table never apologized for thrift. It welcomed whoever showed up, made a little stretch a lot, and proved that good bread, good oil, and a steady hand can carry a household through feast days and thin weeks alike. If these plates feel familiar, it's because they live in the city's bones. You can still catch the perfume of red gravy from a walk-up, or hear the crackle of breadcrumbs when pasta hits the bowl. Which dish would you bring home first? Shrimp and red gravy twirled over spaghetti, a muffuletta pressed overnight on your counter, or a Friday bowl of pasta and toasted crumbs that tastes richer than it costs? Tell us your family's little Palermo memory. Who taught you to dress bread just so? Who scraped the lemon ice? Who guarded the olive salad jar? And what went into your pot when the neighborhood gathered? Add your story, and we'll keep tracing these everyday feasts that turn small budgets into big tables. Drawn from community and church cookbooks, Italian language newspapers, market ledgers, oral histories, and early 20th century New Orleans food columns. Names, spellings, and preparations varied by household, parish, and season. Dishes changed with prices, weather, and what the boats brought in. Historical best effort. Sources noted in description. Vintage cookbooks, newspapers, oral histories, archives.